Welcome to the Thrive Journey. We're a new podcast dedicated to empowering entrepreneurs to uncover and embrace their purpose here on earth. As multifaceted human beings, we strive to navigate our financial, mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. And that's what this podcast is all about. We're here to inspire, uplift, and equip you with the tools to thrive on your journey to greatness. All we ask in return is your support. 1, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or 2, download the podcast from your favorite platform. Your engagement, it helps us grow and attract incredible guests who will enrich your life with valuable insights and wisdom. Now, in turn, we promise to keep bringing you content that enlivens, edifies, and elevates your journey, not just as an entrepreneur, but as a human being. And with that, I want to thank you for being a part of the Thrive Journey. Energetic and great teachers bring about energetic and great students. So where's that disconnect? Where do you think that disconnect is?
Well, and
Is it pay? What do you think it is?
Well, I think teachers are everybody blames every problem on teachers and they just keep on giving teachers more and more to do. There's a survey done every 10 years on teachers' greatest fears. In the 1950s, the greatest fear of teachers in America was students talking without raising their hands. In 2020, 70 years later,
and speaking, what are the key things that people should work on?
Okay, so when I'm working with clients, my co-owner is a guy by the name of Coach Jimmy Hayes Nelson. It's great because his background is Broadway, and I'm the educator. I call us the professor and the poet. And we teach people a structure, and this structure works whether you're speaking to 1,000 people or to 100 people or even one-on-one. It's flexible enough to use live or virtual. It's you can use it on a webinar, or you can use it when you're there. You can use it in the boardroom, in the ballroom, in the courtroom, in the classroom, in the heck. One of my clients, he used it in the restroom. He did a pitch in the urinal. I don't recommend you do that. And hopefully he told the guy to wash his hands afterwards. But it's a structure.
Yeah,
so there's 4 key elements to a really well-crafted story.
Yeah. Beat up, bullied, and dunked on. Beat up, bullied, and dunked on. Bullied and dunked on. Yeah. Let's get it.
Welcome to another episode of the Thrive Well Journey. Check this out. According to Statista.com, did you know that 42% of college graduates never read another book after college? 70% of Americans have not been in a bookstore in the past 5 years, and 60% of U.S. public school students do not read at grade level. And this was published on February 21st, 2024. Well, today we have a guest who truly embodies the spirit of bringing back joy to reading, teaching, and education. He's a highly sought-after speaker, trainer, and coach, affectionately known as Jim Carrey with a PhD. And we'll talk about that nickname in the conversation. Dr. Danny Brassell has delivered over 3,500 presentations worldwide, captivating audiences with his insights on leadership, motivation, and powerful communication. He's the author of 16 books, including his latest, which is Leadership Begins with Motivation. And he's the co-founder of the world's leading reading engagement program, helping parents ignite a love for reading in their kids. But that's not all. Danny's on a mission to help business owners, entrepreneurs, and executives unlock greater income, freedom, and impact through engaging presentations, through inspiring action. Get ready for an exciting conversation with Dr. Brassell. Dr. Brassell, how are you doing today?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me, Michael. More importantly, thanks for spreading some joy in the world. We need a lot more of you.
Yes, we do. Joy, I was talking to someone not too long ago, and there was a difference between happy and joy. And I'm like, yeah, there is a difference. And joy is this internal thing that just, it's not a fading thing,
Yeah, it's a state of mind.
What is your mission? Yeah. I know we talked about your mission, just kind of skimmed over it in the intro. What is your mission?
So my
in depth
mission,
there.
Michael, is to bring joy back in education and the workplace. I do that by enhancing communication skills. And so basically there's 4 areas of communication, being speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And so I've made sure to create different businesses that deal with those various aspects. So in terms of writing, I've now written now I'm up to 18 books, just finished number 18 this past week. I'm very excited. It's coming out in December. Like you said, I speak over 100 dates a year all over the world, pumping up audiences, primarily schools, but also businesses as well. You did mention, in terms of reading, I had the world's top reading engagement program, which in just over 2 months shows parents how to get their kids to read more, read better, and most importantly, to love reading. And then finally, my real passion right now is as listening as a coach, is I get to work with individuals, businesses, and entrepreneurs, leverage speaking on stages as a major client lead source. So that's a whole big mouthful. Hopefully, I'll be more succinct in my answers to your short questions.
Well, no, that's good because it gives an overview of all the questions that I do have. So it's really great and perfect. But just so that we can get a sense of who you are, let's kind of go back to where I understand that you to be at the beginning of who you were,
Mm-hmm.
which is a journalist, right? Did you start as a journalist and then move into school teaching, or what was that?
Yeah, it was kind of funny, Michael. I started as a journalist, and then I was having drinks with people, and I had a great job. I was connected to basically every major newspaper editor in the country, and an editor at a major newspaper offered me $16,500 a year to do the city beat in their city. And meanwhile, a friend told me, hey, they need teachers in South Central Los Angeles and Compton. They're paying $25,000. So I always tell people I became an educator for the noblest of reasons, for the high pay. And it turned out
Mhm.
I loved teaching. I really love my students, and it's just become a passion of mine.
You know, it's so funny because we were talking about just the statistics in the introduction there. And again, 42% of college graduates never read another book. And just going back to the 60% of US public school students do not read at grade level. What do you think that attributes what's attributed to that?
Well, so that's actually why I created my reading program, thereadinghabit.com, is basically I think schools do an adequate job of teaching kids how to read. But the question I always ask people is, well, what good is it teaching a kid how to read if they never want to read? I teach kids why to read because I've never had to tell a kid, go turn on the TV. I've never had to tell a kid, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid, go read. I want them to choose to do it because they love it. And there are simple strategies that I share with parents and teachers on how to get kids to love reading. Because the more excited we get kids to read, the more likely they are to read. And the more you read, the better you get.
That's true. I remember, I don't know, I was little. I was a youngster, and I was tagging along with my mom, but she would always take me to a library. And you know, I'm from Michigan, so back in Michigan, they would have these initiatives back then, early '80s or something like that. And I really enjoyed going to the library. I can still smell what the library was like back then, and enjoy reading. And it was a passion of mine back then. I didn't know it was a passion, but I loved doing it. And now I have a nephew who's about, one of my nephews, 10, 11, or so. I think he's going to be 11. And he's smart. He's really intelligent for his age. And he loves to read. But we have to tell him, like, you have to read at least 10 pages today. And bringing back joy to reading, like, what do you do to, inspire that within the parents?
So I just went to a football game with a buddy that we had been to a game about a year ago, and he complained to me that his 2 sons hated reading. And I said, well, what are they reading right now? And he's like, well, the teacher has them reading these things. I'm like, stop that. What do the kids like? They're like, well, they like Marvel comics. I'm like, get them reading Marvel comics. Again, the research is very clear on this. It doesn't matter what you read. What matters is how much you read. It doesn't matter if you're reading James Joyce or James and the Giant Peach. People who read more
Mhm.
read better. The little boy who only reads Captain Underpants is going to become a better reader than the little boy who refuses to read anything. Captain Underpants is the gateway drug to Shakespeare, but we got to get the kid hooked first. And I can't tell you how many. When I was teaching second grade, I had a little boy, Kiara, and Kiara's first grade teacher told me, Kiara don't know nothing. I'm like, well, thank you for that. Well, Kiara, who don't know nothing, comes into my classroom one day. This is a long time ago, Michael. He's like, hey, Miss Brassell, you see Barkley last night? He had 18 points and 16 boards. I'm like, thank you, Kiara, because from that day forward, every day after lunch, Michael, I'd sit Kiara on my lap. We'd read the LA Times sports page together. And guess what? By the end of the year, he's one of my best readers. And all that kid ever read about were sports stories. Now, do I think you need to expand your reading to other things? Yes, but you got to get the kid hooked first. And that's where we're missing so many kids is we don't. I was exactly the opposite of you, Michael. I hated reading growing up. My father's a librarian. I always hated the public library. It always smelled funny
Oh
to
wow.
me.
Oh wow.
It smelled funny to me. The furniture was uncomfortable. There was always some elderly woman telling me to be quiet. There's always some freaky homeless guy who thinks he's a vampire hanging out by the shelves. I always hated the public library. And it wasn't until I started teaching in the inner city where I saw a lot of my students didn't have a lot of the advantages I had growing up. And I basically said, shame on me. I mean, I was blessed, Michael. Both of my parents were in the home. We weren't wealthy. We were poor, but we always had food on the table. And my parents always read in front of us kids, to us kids, and we had plenty of access to reading materials. And I realized, you know what? Something has to be done about this. I need to make sure that everybody has at least the opportunity to succeed. And that's what drives me nuts is when you give a statistic like that with over 40% of college graduates never open up a book again. I'm like, what are we doing wrong in this country? That's crazy to me. That shows me that we're forcing people to read things that they don't want to read rather than showing them that reading is a lot of different things. I mean, when I was in high school, I had a teacher. She made us read the Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. And no offense to people that love Nathaniel Hawthorne, the book is about, it's written like the 19th century. Hester Prynne commits adultery and she's forced to wear an A on her chest. And I raised my hand in class and I asked my teacher if I could wear a B on my chest because I was so bored reading that book. And I think about, why doesn't that teacher just get me? I'll tell you right now, Sports Illustrated is written at a higher level than the network news. Why not have the kid read sports? I have little kids all the time. They say the kid can't read. The kid just read the word Tyrannosaurus Rex. I mean, that's a pretty difficult word to read, but it shows me the kid's interested in it. So I think there's a disconnect. I'm sorry, I just got on my soapbox. It gets me gets me irritated that I see people that don't like reading. It's because they were force fed things that. And I'm not saying. I was just doing a podcast earlier today with a journalist in Nigeria, and she was talking about how a lot of the kids didn't like what they were reading. I said, well, of course they don't, because you're still based on I mean, Nigeria's been independent, I think, since 1960. It's still based on a British schooling system. So the kids are forced to read Jane Austen and Charles Dickens and William Shakespeare. There's nothing wrong with those authors at all. But maybe the kids would like to read like a Nigerian author like Chinua Achebe or something that they're actually interested in. Figure out what the kid's interested in and let that drive your instruction.
Right. You know, there was I watched a video of yours and it was a snippet. And just it was a story about a gifted young man, and I think you said the teacher was Miss Hampton,
Yeah.
and how she would destroy the young man. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So one of my favorite. I've taught most of my career. I spent in South Central Los Angeles in the Watts Compton area. I did teach third grade for a year in Houston, Texas. And I know you're not supposed to have a favorite student. I had a favorite student. So his name was Howard, and Howard was the son of a Baptist minister. And Howard's father spoke like Martin Luther King Jr., which meant Howard spoke like Martin Luther King Jr. And so one day I was reading a book to the class called Stuart Little by this guy named E.B. White. Write his name down. He's going to be big someday. E.B. White. And after I read a chapter, I always have the kids applaud the author. And so one day the kids are applauding, and one of my little boys, Deshaun, he starts laughing. He's like, I like Stuart because he's little. And Howard stands up and he's like, don't you get it? Don't you get it? We all be little. We all be little. but we be big someday, like Mr. B. And he pointed at me, and I realized this child could lead a revolt. And Howard is the reason I became a teacher. I love his unbridled enthusiasm, and I was worried to death for Howard because I knew next year he was getting Miss Hampton, and Miss Hampton was going to she was going to misinterpret his enthusiasm as a discipline problem, because Miss Hampton is a direct descendant of Darth Vader. And that really taught me something very important. Never give a kid an answer. Give them a strategy, because sooner or later, all of us are going to have a Miss Hampton to deal with. Have we properly trained people on how to deal with people like that? So, I mean, I miss Howard's one of my favorites.
That's pretty exciting. I like the impression that you gave him. It put me in the space of how brilliant he was or is, and just the magnanimous energy that he has at that age.
Oh yeah.
That's pretty
This
great.
is what disappoints me, Michael. I mean, I started off as a high school teacher. I went from high school to middle school to upper elementary to lower elementary to pretty soon, instead of preparing students for college, I was coming home with snot marks all over my pants from my little ones hugging me. And what I learned is what works with a 12th grader does not necessarily work with a kindergartner. But what works with a kindergartner works with all age levels. We need to get those kids up and moving and pumped up. And it broke my heart because my kindergartners would go to bed with their backpacks on. They were so excited to come to school the next day. Meanwhile, my 8th graders were thinking of ways to get sick. What happened in those 8 years to get that kid to hate school so much? If I'm doing my job, my kids should be banging on my classroom door at 6 a.m. They're so excited to come in. And they should be in tears when they hear that final bell at the end of the day because they don't want to leave. And, if it's not fun, I'm not doing it. And I always told my kids, I'm like, hey, you got the rest of your life to be miserable. This year we're laughing. Average adult lasts 15 times a day. Average kindergartner lasts 300 times a day. You guys got to make me laugh 315 times every day. Kids are, yeah, kids are great. I actually, I'm very passionate about the little ones. I miss being in the classroom.
I can hear that. I mean, as you were talking, the connection that I was hearing is that energetic and great teachers bring about energetic and great students. So where's that disconnect? Where do you think that disconnect is?
Well, and
is it pay? Is it, what do you think it is?
Well, I think teachers are, I mean, everybody blames every problem on teachers and they just keep on giving teachers more and more to do. I mean, there's a survey done every 10 years on teachers' greatest fears. In the 1950s, the greatest fear of teachers in America was students talking without raising their hands. In 2020, 70 years later, it's school shootings. It's crazy.
Right.
I mean, we've actually had we've lost more students in school shootings in the United States in the last 4 years than we've lost troops stationed abroad in the military. Everybody says, yeah, my brother's in the Air Force, and so we were at lunch one day. He was in uniform, and the waitress comes up afterwards, and she looks at my brother. She's like, "Thank you for your service, sir. We're going to give you a complimentary lunch." And I look at her, I'm like, why don't you thank me for my service? I've had many more weapons drawn on me. I'm a public school teacher. He's living the good life. Yeah. And so I think that one of the big disconnects, I mean, teachers just get, I can't use language, but they get pushed aside all the time. They get blamed for every single thing. And I always say to the critics of teachers, I encourage them to do that job for 1 week. They will see how difficult it is with all the different, and I was actually kind of delighted when COVID happened. I told my wife, I'm like, oh, there's a couple of things that America's going to learn because of COVID. And my wife's like, well, what's that? I'm like, well, first of all, they're going to learn the deep secret that 12 to 15 million kids in this country, the reason they go to school is so that they can eat. A lot of people don't know that. And then second of all, these parents are going to have to teach their own kids are going to become so frustrated. I'm like, yeah, multiply that by 32, and they're all different kids with different needs. I mean, it's actually what I loved about teaching is the challenge is what makes Michael get excited about learning. What helps Howard, what helps Tyrell. I'm always looking at what gets this, because every kid's a little bit different, and that's the thing. That's the other
Right,
thing in
exactly.
America. We try to do everything the same. And I'm like, but that's the problem. When is America going to figure out the strength of our country is our diversity? I was being
Mhm.
interviewed and a person said, well, what do you think, public school or private school? And my answer was yes. Some kids should go to a public school. Some kids should go to a private school. Some kids should be homeschooled. Some kids should go to a vocational school or a magnet school. I mean, there's lots of different ways to get through to a kid. The reason I love teaching, I'm also a coach. Thank God for sports, because the reason a lot of my boys would come to school is so that they'd be eligible so they could play basketball or football or
Mhm.
whatever, which is great. But again, I don't know why we're not. I don't know. It's very you get philosophical about these things, but I always tell people anybody can teach. It takes a lot of hard work to be a good teacher, though.
To be a good
And
teacher,
I
yeah.
hate that saying when they say, "Oh, if you touch just one child, you have succeeded as a teacher." I used to tell my teachers, if you touch just one kid, please find another job. Let's shoot for the moon and get at least half the
Right.
kids achieving. It's amazing how low we set the expectations for students. So it's a big thing. And of course, we have elections in this country and nobody ever really talks about like education. I was just speaking at a school. It's beautiful. There was a chandelier in the auditorium. And I told the teachers, I'm like, you better be thanking God you're at this school. I've never taught at a school without metal detectors and heavy security, you know, and it
Yeah.
pains me that some kids are put in what seems like a penitentiary. I'm like, every kid, there's a great book by Jonathan Cazal, Savage Inequalities. I think it needs to be read by the President of the United States and every member of Congress. It talks about the huge discrepancies in public school funding in this country. And until I see every kid getting a fair opportunity, you're going to hear me passionate like this, getting angry and saying, hey, we need to make sure every kid has a fair shot.
That kind of leads me into this is not reading, but it is math. And there was my fraternity brother had something on his page where it said that I'm gonna say a certain public school system has like 23 students. They have 0 students proficient in math, and then at their grade level, and many more having only 1 or 2. And I was like, why are the public school systems, failing these children? And his response was, it's systemic, and it has become an issue that requires the full support of the nuclear family and involved community. Uh, Relying on a failing system to correct an intentionally created problem is an exercise in futility.
I love the
What do
way
you
you
think about
phrase that.
that?
That's great. Hey
Oh, that
man,
was him.
I'm a Baptist in the front row with your fraternity brother. I think that's exactly right. I mean,
Shout out to
but
Musa.
it's the same thing with math, though. I mean, I'm not a math expert. I will say this, though. I've never understood how an elementary school teacher has a difficult time teaching elementary math. I mean, I can teach almost every single elementary math standard, provided I relate it to food, money, or an NBA box score. We graduate kids in this country with calculus, but they don't know how to balance a checkbook. You need to show kids
Checkbook,
how they're
yeah.
going to use this. The same thing with Kiara was a perfect example. So Kiara, my boy, that his first grade teacher said he didn't know nothing. Oh, he can't do math. I'm like, he can't do math. I guarantee you, he can figure out Mookie Betts' batting average within 3 seconds, no problem, because he's interested in it. You got to
Hmm.
figure out what the kids are interested in and how they're going to use this stuff.
Right. Yeah, make it practical to them. Like it's amazing how, and I get to know like what they're learning through my nephew,
Mm-hmm.
and and it's crazy. It's a whole different math system.
Yeah.
It seems like it's a little gnarly.
Yep. 1 + 1 = 11 in today's math.
In today's math, it's something else. Um, you transition from the classroom to basically becoming like a leader in communication.
Mm-hmm.
What brought you out of the classroom into that new world?
Yeah, so well, I'll be very vulnerable right now. So it was basically out of financial necessity. My wife and I attended a real estate seminar one weekend. It turned out to be a scam. We lost everything. I could focus on all the negatives that came out of it. I prefer to focus on the positives. So first of all, my wife is my life mate. She stuck by me even though I put her through the ringer. Second of all, I no longer value money as much as I used to because I realize you can lose it all in a second.
Mm.
Third, I try not to judge other people because if I was somebody who saw what I did, I would have said, you deserve that. But now I realize if you don't know everything about a person, you really don't know anything about a person. Fourth, I became a Christian and I'm embarrassed about that. But the more I read my Bible, the more I realize I'm not the first screw up to find Jesus. And then fifth, I did not want to declare bankruptcy. And my accountant said, well, you have to make this much more money this year if you want to not file for bankruptcy. Well, I started speaking on the side and I hit that number, Michael. Well, the next year he gave me a much higher number and I hit that number right on the number. And so in year 3, I thought to myself, well, maybe I should set a higher number. And basically during one of the worst economic downturns in American history, I was able to build up a speaking business, which has afforded me all kinds of incredible opportunities, which I'm now basically always looking for the pivot. I always take the bad things and figure out how to make them, to turn them into my advantage. So for example, I had always resisted coaching. People had always asked me to coach them. And I don't like coaching just because I coach and teach the same way. I have a very high standard and I'm on you and I hold you accountable. I'm like, no, you're going to have to do the work. I used to always, when I was talking to my players, I'm like, hey, I'm looking for the guys with heart, not talent, because heart will beat talent in the end. I'm going to teach you the habits to win. Talent gets lazy. But that being said, COVID, I lost over 100 speaking gigs overnight. And so I had to pivot. And so I started coaching people and I absolutely love it. It's just as rewarding as teaching used to be. I get to see, now instead of seeing like kindergartners learn how to add, now I'm watching entrepreneurs expand their business clientele and produce wonderful results. And I just love it.
How do you lose over 100 gigs in one day?
COVID within 24 hours.
Oh, because of COVID. Okay. I missed that. Okay.
I'll never forget that night. Michael, that was great. And I know everybody listening, they all have their COVID stories because I was in Orange County, California in a hotel and I'm watching a basketball game. And as I'm watching the basketball game, it said that I think it was like the Salt Lake City, New Orleans game was postponed. And I'm like, postponed? It's a basketball game. Why are you postponing a basketball game? And right as I'm thinking that, the announcer's like, why is that game postponed? And then like an hour later, they say Rudy Gobert has COVID. And then like an hour later, they shut down all the NBA. And I'm like, what? And then like an hour after that, they shut down the NHL. I'm like, what? And then it's like Tom Hanks has it in Australia. I'm like, what is going on? And I was supposed to speak in Orange, California the next day. And the conference organizer calls me at about 11:30 at night. He's like, hey, Danny. And I'm like, I bet you're calling to tell me you got twice as many people coming. And he's like, man, Danny, I hate to do this, but we got to cancel. I'm like, what are you going to do? And like literally within 24 hours, every engagement on my schedule canceled. And I never thought you could lose business like that quick, but it happened. So it's a good humbling experience. Good lesson.
Yeah, COVID caused a lot of people to learn how to pivot or get lost in the pivot, one or the other. I remember actually this was 2020, and I was on dialysis at the time.
Oh wow!
But it's crazy because before it was actually announced, I was talking to a friend of mine. She was like, I'm not feeling well. And she was going through all these symptoms before COVID was announced. After I got off the phone with her, maybe a week later, I started having the symptoms and was really sick. And I called her back. I was like, you got me sick over the phone.
That's right.
And then not but a month later, here's COVID being announced what COVID was. And it was interesting during that time how everything just went crazy. But in that space, you found a new way of forwarding your life and your business.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, again, I'm an optimistic person. I always look at the good that comes out of the bad. But one of the great things that happened, I started doing podcasts like yours, Michael, and I started doing podcasts like even today, earlier today, I was on a podcast in Nigeria and one in England. And all of a sudden, it dawned on me. I'm like, wait a sec. I've just been thinking about the United States. There are all kinds of opportunities around the world. And, one of my businesses was basically created in India. And I was just telling the guy the other night, I'm like, I don't care if anybody in America knows me. I just want to be a rock star in India. India is 1.5 billion people. It's amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot of people there.
Yeah, that's right.
That's amazing. So when now that you're coaching, you're going around the world, and you're causing leaders. What is that? How you got the name Jim Carrey, the PhD? What's that all
Well,
about?
I take my job seriously, but I don't
Jim
take
Carrey with a
myself too
PhD.
seriously because I ain't all that, and neither are you, Michael. And if you think you're all that, teach kindergarten for 1 week. Those little ones will set you straight. One of my little girls, LaShonda, raises her hand one day. She's like, Miss Brassell, when are you going to trim your nose hair? I'm like, this afternoon. Thanks for bringing that to my attention, LaShonda. I ain't all that. And so it's also what distinguishes me a little bit as a coach, Michael, is a lot of these people, what I train you to do is how to create a well-crafted story that you can use again and again to introduce yourself to new audiences, to acquire clients that way. Now, a lot of people, they teach you to tell the saddest story of your life. And there's 3 reasons why I hate that. First of all, the world just survived a global pandemic. Everybody's had some bad stuff happen to them. I don't think we need to hear another
Right.
sad story. I like stories of hope.
Yeah.
Second of all, do you really want to tell the same sad story again and again? I mean, you got to be stronger than me to talk about the worst day of your life to strangers over 1,000 times. But third, and this is the most important one, which I think people hate me for, but I have one objective when I'm on stage. I want you to leave feeling better than when you came in. I want you smiling, laughing, happy. I can tell the same stories and the same jokes, and I feel like it's admirable that my goal is to get you to feel better about yourself. I believe that these people that keep on telling those sad stories again and again, by the 20th time they've told that sad story, those are now crocodile tears, and now you're being manipulative. And I'm not saying it's not an effective sales strategy. It's a very effective sales strategy. But I personally don't want to have to take a shower after I speak because I've just manipulated my audience to buy my product. I want them to want to do business with me because they want to. It's a relationship. This is a person I want to do business with because this is a person that's about service, not about sales.
What's up, Thrive Well Journey listeners and watchers? Look, if you're someone with big dreams of entrepreneurship but need a flexible way to earn income while building your business, let me tell you about the Orions Group. Through our partnership with Arise Virtual Solutions, you can become a customer support professional, aka CSP, and start earning from home on your own terms. Arise offers a streamlined certification process, getting you trained and ready to work with well-known brands all across America. You can set your own hours, choose the clients you want to work with, and create a work-life balance that fits your entrepreneurial goals. The best part, you don't have to choose between your side gig and your business dreams. Being a CSP with the Orions Group means you can bring in extra income while have the flexibility to focus on growing your own venture, much like I did. Whether you're looking to supplement your income or need a bridge while building your empire, this is the opportunity for you. You interested? If so, head over to www.theorionsgroup.com to learn more about becoming a CSP with the Orions Group. Look here. Support your entrepreneurial journey while supporting the Thrive Well Journey podcast at the same time. All right, one more time, www.theorionsgroup.com. All right, we're done with the spot. Let's get back to the podcast. So how does one get into being a speaker, a public speaker?
Well, like I said, the more screwed up your life, the better. That'll help you out a lot. There's 2 things that I always suggest to people in order to get better at speaking. First of all, you got to watch lots of speakers. So I watch at least 10 speakers a day. I watch comedians, I watch politicians, I watch televangelists, I watch them in front of big groups, in front of small groups, in front of men, in front of women. Here, I'll give you a ninja strategy. I watch a lot of award shows because when a person wins the Academy Award, they only have 45 seconds to connect with their audience. I want to see how they use their 45 seconds. Now, most people waste their time. They get up there like, I want to thank God. I want to thank the Academy. It's stupid. Nobody pays attention. But every now and then somebody does something remarkable. So a couple of years ago, there was a gentleman, I think his name was Joe Walker. He won the Academy Award for Best Film Editing. Now, this is Hollywood. A lot of important people in the audience, a bunch of actors sitting there, and they're not paying attention because this is best film editing. Well, Joe Walker gets up there, and he's British, and he speaks very slowly and deliberately, and he says, a lot of people don't know this, but when phrased properly, the term Academy Award nominee can be used as an insult. Well, now the camera pans the audience, and you see people kind of leaning in, like, what's he talking about? And he says, for example, yesterday I got in an argument with my 17-year-old daughter, and she said, well, Academy Award nominee Joe Walker. All of a sudden, you see everybody laughing hysterically. He gets off stage. Denzel Washington wants to meet him. Sandra Bullock wants to meet him. Brad Pitt wants to meet him. Time magazine said it was one of the highlights of the Academy Awards. That's the power of connecting in 45 seconds. So the first thing you have to do to get better at speaking is watch a lot of good speakers. Second of all, one of my mentors was a guy named Jim Rohn, and Jim used to say, you can't pay other people to do your push-ups. Translation, you gotta do the work. You know this, you were an actor, Michael. It's all in the reps. You know, you're the first, same thing with this podcast. The first time you did this podcast, it sucked. The second time you did this podcast, it sucked, but it didn't suck as much as the first time. And now you're in a flow, so you got no problem. And that's how you get better at anything. And this is what I'm always working on clients with. I'm like, hey, you got to do your reps. I have a guy, Jason, I worked with 3 years ago. I'm so proud of Jason because he did what I said. I said, Jason, you got to go out there and speak to schools, speak to service organizations, speak to synagogues, to temples, to churches, to chambers of commerce. You know, he said, I have none of those audiences. I'm like, hey, you have a Facebook account? He said, yes. I'm like, go on Facebook Live every day and practice your speech. And so he did that. The next day he went on Facebook Live, and one woman from Ontario, Canada accidentally watched him, and he stunk. The second day he did it at the exact same time. He had like 3 people watch him, and he stunk, but he didn't stink as bad as the first time. Well, 3 years later, Michael, Jason now has an audience of over 6,000 people, and he didn't make 7 figures last year, but he almost made 7 figures based on that audience. He did it through consistency. He did the work. You know, you don't get better at anything. These things, everybody loves to look at Tiger Woods, say he's the greatest golfer ever to live. I'm like, people don't watch how much he practiced, man. That kid, he practices harder than anybody else. I mean, plus he was wise enough. He hired a putting coach, and he hired a driving coach, and he hired a mental coach. You know, maybe he should have hired a relationship coach, and that would have been a little bit better too. But it also demonstrates the power of coaches.
It's a whole different world there. That's great. You know, so when you talked about the guy who went and did Facebook Live, he stunk. You know, the first few times or whatever. Was there a time that you ever bombed?
All the time, man. Just
all the time.
Do swimmers get wet? Do boxers take it in the face from time? Of course, yeah. I've had lines where, you know, you look at they're just staring at you like, what are you? I mean, well, I shouldn't say it. I went to college in Washington, D.C., and before I was a journalist, when I was in college, to pay for my spring breaks, I used to do stand-up comedy, and my agent was a 6'11", 300-pound ex-defensive lineman from the Cincinnati Bengals, Sherman, and he only booked me in all-black strip clubs in Anacostia in Southeast Washington, and I would sit there and do my routine. And they're looking at me like, what is this guy doing? And I'm just sitting there. I get paid $75 for a 15-minute set. And one night it was ladies' night, and the guy before me went out, and he had like this knit bikini. And so my opening line was, wow, my mom used to knit me sweaters. Total silence, Michael. And I'm looking at my watch, 14 minutes and 50 seconds to go. Yeah, it gave me a spine. But that's what I loved about teaching. If you know, as an actor, you would have loved it. I mean, being a teacher, you got your audience. They're forced to be there every single day. And the kindergartners are what made me a better teacher because they have about a 7-minute attention span. And it taught me, keep it moving, man. I got to keep them engaged and moving. And they were great. I learned everything I needed about teaching in kindergarten.
Yeah, the youth keeps it real. That's what I'll say. The youth keeps it real.
Absolutely.
So in leadership and speaking, what are the key things that people should work on?
Okay, so when I'm working with clients, my co-owner is a guy by the name of Coach Jimmy Hayes Nelson. It's great because his background is Broadway, and I'm the educator. I call us the professor and the poet. And we teach people a structure, and this structure works whether you're speaking to 1,000 people or to 100 people or even one-on-one. It's flexible enough to use live or virtual. It's you can use it on a webinar, or you can use it when you're there. You can use it in the boardroom, in the ballroom, in the courtroom, in the classroom, in the heck. One of my clients, he used it in the restroom. He did a pitch in the urinal. I don't recommend you do that. And hopefully he told the guy to wash his hands afterwards, but it's a structure.
Yeah,
so there's 4 key elements to a really well-crafted story. My 7th grade teacher, Lynn Eskridge, she gave us the 4 I's. I do the 4 C's, but she did the 4 I's. So a good presentation has an introduction. I call this connect. This is when you're connecting with your audience. This is the most important part of your presentation, because if you don't get them, this is going to teach your audience, should I be present or should I be engaged? Am I into this person or am I just stuck here? All right. Second of all is your instruction, is what Miss Eskridge used. That was her 2nd I. My C is, this is the content of your presentation, which research shows is actually the least important part of your presentation. This is a big mistake most people think. They want to teach, but it's not going to convert in sales. It's teaching, over teaching actually confuses your audience. Then the third part of your presentation, Miss Eskridge would call your invitation to the audience. I call it your call to action. What do you want the audience to do next? And then finally, you end with inspiration. I call it your conclusion, or your it's just another way to connect. But if you do these 4 things and you do them in the proper way, then you're going to see your audience take the next step. That's the only way I judge success. I only judge success in that the people I work with, I was working with a realtor the other day. I said, well, what's a client worth to you? He's like, well, one client, he's like, well, when I sell a house, my commission's about $120,000. I'm like, okay, well, my fee isn't $120,000. All I have to do is find you one client and I'll pay your fee. It'll pay my fee, no problem. And so we worked on that. If I'm working with people, the other thing I just told you content's the least important. There's research that shows this, that it's called the primacy and recency effect. People remember the beginning of your presentation and the end of your presentation. They don't remember anything in between. Oh my gosh, that means the bun is more important than the burger. Load up the beginning and the end with the important stuff. The other fatal mistake I see most people make in presentations is they only speak to half of their audience. They ignore the other half. So Nobel Prize winning economist Daniel Kahneman has a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And he says that there's 2 types of thinkers out there. There's the people that are based on fact and the people that are based on feeling. I call it your Joe Fridays and your Julia Roberts, or if you want to stereotype in a husband-wife. The husband is the Joe Friday. He's just the facts. How much is this going to cost? How long is it going to take? What do I have to do? Some of your audience, when you're making your offer, they need to know that information. That's, they're all about numbers. But then the other part of your audience, they're the Julia Roberts. They don't really care what you sell as long as it makes them feel good. I don't even know anything about Michael, but Michael makes me feel good. I want to work with Michael. And so you need to make sure you have a connecting story that accommodates Michael that way. And then what I take clients through is how to, a really effective speaker, they're also a farmer. They're planting seeds throughout the talk so that by the time you get to your offer, your audience is like, oh, I was hoping he would make an offer. And again, I'm into numbers. I'm actually into the research. There's nothing I do based on opinion. Jimmy, I always say Jimmy's the wife in this relationship. I'm the husband. I want hard facts. I want to see what our numbers are. If you speak to 100 people, how many of that 100 people actually decide to take the next step with you? And it can be a paid offer. It can be an unpaid offer. I mean, it can be a paid offer like, buy my product or enroll in my coaching program. It can be an unpaid offer like sign up for my newsletter or get my free PDF. The choice is yours, but you're trying to get your audience interested in staying engaged with you.
Yeah, those are interesting methods. I was putting myself back in the spaces when I went to different talks, and I would think that I'm a bit of both. I need to have hard facts, but then I have a part of me that, like, if you make my heart go boom boom, you know what I'm saying, or you make me feel or see a possibility in what you're saying, in addition to the facts, um, the hard
Mhm.
facts, then you probably got me.
Yeah. Yeah, and don't discount the
Yeah.
emotional connection, though. That's very important. And so here's an exercise your audience can do. So I want everybody in the audience to get a pen and paper, sit in a comfortable chair, get a libation of choice beside them, and for an hour, just write down every story of your life. And I don't mean the entire story. I just mean triggers, like the time I locked myself out of the car in front of Costco, the time Dad spilt mustard on his tie when we went to that fancy restaurant. You'll find typically in an hour, you'll come up with 400 to 500 stories like this. So that's the first part of the exercise.
Hmm.
The second part of the exercise is then you want to figure out, well, what's this story really about? Oh, this is a story about perseverance. Oh, this is a story about loyalty. And so on my computer, I literally have thousands, if not tens of thousands of these stories cataloged. So whenever I'm trying to make a point in the presentation, I need to make a point about the importance of sticking together. I have a folder called Sticking Together. Here's some stories about that. And every now and then I work with a difficult person who say, nothing's ever happened to me. I'm like, well, even if that's your attitude, if you look at personal development books, one of the most successful personal development books of all time is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, in which he shares no personal stories. All of his stories are based on interviews he had with millionaires. So that's another way to do it, is take other people. I mean, I'm Irish. This is my entire childhood was listening to stories. That's what they always, we don't let the truth get in the way of a good story in Ireland. So it's all a catalog. And
Yeah.
that's what, of all people, it was Joseph Stalin who said, 1 million people dead is a statistic. One person dead is a tragedy. It's all about the story. We're in an election cycle right now. And this has nothing to do with the politics. I'm always looking at the methods that the different politicians are using. I like to make fun of all politicians because have you ever noticed, Michael, that no presidential candidate ever grew up middle class? They all grew up dirt poor because you all want to show, oh, I grew up in a log cabin. I was able to make myself live the American dream. Same thing with motivational speakers. They always say, oh, I grew up in a garage, or I had to wash dishes in my bathtub. I'm like, really? You didn't have a sink? You had to wash dishes in your bathtub? I don't know if I buy that story, but that's the powers. We're always trying to get through points through those stories. I mean, this is through the history of civilization. I mean, cavemen, they used to tell stories of the campfires, and this is how you connect with people. I will give a political example. This is not based on politics. It's just a very effective strategy. So President Reagan,
Okay. Good.
when he gave his State of the Union address, I think he was the first president, and every president's copied him since then, is he wouldn't talk about healthcare. He'd be up there and he's like, well, it's like Tom Bilson, Tom, stand up. And this guy is in the gallery and waves and everybody applauds. Tom works at the GM plant in Louisville, Kentucky. He got injured on the job. He doesn't have health insurance and he can't make his rent payment because he had to pay the doctor. So now when Americans are thinking of healthcare, they're not thinking of healthcare. They're thinking Joe. That's really smart.
Hmm.
You got to put it through the framework of a story. And they do this. The best example I can give was we just watched the Olympics. I love the Olympics. I absolutely love the Olympics because they do the
Yeah.
background stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my wife hates watching the Olympics with me because I always root against America. I'm like, honey,
What?
Honey, who am I going to root for? The American with the microchip in his Nike shoes, or the barefoot Sudanese refugee who just survived a civil war? They did his background story. He's like, I learned how to run running away from the bullets in my village. I'm like, of course I'm rooting for that guy. It's an amazing story. It's the story. And this is why I love sports. Sports is always about the story. How do we CBS, when they used to do the NFL Today, they don't do it the way they used to, which was better in the 80s when it was Madden and Summerall, because at the very beginning of the game, they'd be like, dun, 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 and he'd be like, Joe Montana, is known as the greatest of all time, but here's one nemesis he's always had. And then it shows Bill Parcells, the New York Giants, who have a defense. And it's like building up a story.
Mm-hmm.
So now when you watch it, you're like, oh, I want to watch these different matchups. It was really smart the way they do that. They do that a little bit. I think the NBA does a little bit better job of creating those matchups now where you're like, oh, let's see the storyline between these people. But that's really how you create the interest. It's really not as much. That's why Americans always want the underdog, because we love the story of the struggle. And so it's really a good thing for all.
Yeah.
I totally drifted off from your question, but that's really, if you're trying to get better as a speaker, that's what people want. They want that. That's why Rocky's like the greatest movie ever made, because people forget Rocky lost to Apollo Creed, but it doesn't matter, because in the movie, the night before, he's sitting there in bed with Adrian. He's like, Adrian, I'm going to lose, but I just want to go the distance with the champ. I want to go the distance. And if you watch Rocky, he goes the distance with Apollo Creed. He loses, but he's the champion because he went the distance. And that's why everybody loves Rocky, is he gets hit, but he gets right back up. It's the greatest story of all time.
It's the story, it's the connection, it's the emotion. Yeah. That's good. That's good. That's really good, because now the audience, you have something definitely to go away with if you are interested in moving on as a speaker. I have a couple more questions for you. What how do you in your speaking, I know that, well, probably not, but in the beginning, did you have stage fright? And if you did, how did you get over it? Or how would you help someone?
Yeah, so I was speaking to a school in India, and I got all the kids all pumped up. And afterwards, I was shaking hands with all the kids. And all of a sudden, this little boy comes up to me. He's about 6 years old, and he has tears in his eyes, Michael. And I notice he's missing his left arm. And he looks up at me. He's like, how can I succeed? And so I get down at his eye level, and I'm like, when I was your age, I went to 18 different schools before I was 12 years old. Everybody called me stupid because I stuttered. And eventually I had a teacher that worked one-on-one with me, and she would sing things to me, and I would sing them back, and I didn't have my stutter when I sang. And I eventually lost my stutter, and I became a swan. It's kind of like the movie The King's Speech. But I looked in that boy's eyes. I'm like, isn't it interesting that the little boy everybody said was stupid because he couldn't talk right, now gets paid ridiculous amounts of money to travel the world to do what? And he gets the biggest grin on his face. He's like, speak. I'm like, don't let anybody ever tell you what you cannot do. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. And again, a couple of weeks ago, I gave a presentation. This woman comes up to me afterwards. She's like, oh, I would love to be a speaker like you, but I can't be as quick as you. You're so quick with those questions and answers. And I looked at her and I'm like, just so you know, the question you asked me, I've had 500 people ask me that question. So before you asked it, I had 500 opportunities to craft the perfect answer, which totally made you feel like I was really smart. But I'm not that smart. I just had a lot of practice with it. Same thing with the podcast. It's in the reps. Yeah. And so if you have stage fright, you got it. And frankly, you're in great company. I mean, Barbara Streisand, she was terrified before she ever took the stage as a singer. President Reagan, another example, used to vomit before every speech he ever gave. Bill Russell, one of the greatest basketball players of all time, vomited before every single game. They were so freaked out about that. So you're in good company. There's lots of people with stage fright. It's not a big deal. It's something that you can get over. It's through training and mental exercises and breathing. But I work with, most of the people I work with aren't speakers. They're just people trying to get more clients. And I show them simple strategies you can use to make your speeches engaging and to get rid of that stage fright.
Yeah, I never had stage fright, but I did have performance scare. When I was a wrestler, I I would always throw up nothing. before I went to a
Ooh.
match, and it was like I mean I was totally frightened, um, and I would get in the ring and wrestle or the mat rather and wrestle, and I would win most times, but it would just that emotion that would show up before I went in and did the wrestling. But after a while, I stopped, doing the dry heaving and fake throwing up.
Better than Bill.
So, like
I
you
mean,
said,
Bill
it does
Russell did
take
it
time.
his entire career. As a matter of fact, it got to the point where Red Auerbach, the coach of the Celtics, he's like, "Damn it, Bill, will you puke so we can go out onto the court?" Because they knew he couldn't play until he had vomited. It was
You
ridiculous.
couldn't play
But you're in good
until you
company,
puke.
and that's completely. And isn't it interesting how your mind? I always tell this to students. I'm like, in your mind, you'll create things that are so much worse than anything that can happen in reality. That's why I like older movies as opposed to newer movies. Newer movies, they show everything. And people are like, oh, that's very violent. I'm like, actually, it's more violent when you have to imagine for yourself some of the things, some of those older movies, they leave your mind to the imagination, it's much scarier, the imagination.
Yeah, the imagination can do some tricks. It can play games and
Sure
play
can.
tricks, man. I tell you, even as an adult, I
Yep,
tell you.
of course, especially for
I, wa-
adults.
I,
Kids are better than that. I always say this: we underestimate kids.
yeah.
Kids, I love their spontaneity, their enthusiasm. I can ask my kindergartners, "What's 2 + 2?" And within 3 seconds, kids are like, 4, 7. I got a dog. You know, and it only takes me till about third grade where the entire class is quiet because school taught that kid never to take a risk, and it
hmm
just breaks my heart. You gotta get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah. That's pretty much my life these days. And I'm okay with it. I'm okay with living in the unknown most times. Most
Well, you were
times.
an actor too,
Um,
Michael. I mean, you've dealt with all forms
yeah.
of rejection. I mean, you should be
Oh
excited
yeah.
every time you get a rejection. Say, "Great, that's getting me closer to yes." Keep on. I need the people
hmm
to tell me no. It's getting me closer to the yes. That's the attitude you have to have.
Yeah. These days, no's they don't affect me like they
Yep.
used to. Especially in the beginning, it was like you have these bright eyes, and it's like, oh my god, this is a great part. Yeah, they're not going to pick you. All right, okay. Then over and over again, the nose would you know bring the dimmer in my
Yeah.
eyes, and I wouldn't have that much of a gleam. But as you kind of live in life and you shift, your mindset
Hmm.
shifts, and that's where I'm at now. My mindset has shifted. I know I can't talk right now. um but you have really shown us like how you've really pivoted from being a journalist to a teacher to teaching professors to teaching leaders and speaking. um is an extraordinary journey. Like, what would be your message to somebody who's in the middle of their pivot and trying to make sense out of their life?
Keep your eyes open. There's all kinds of opportunities every single day. I mean, that's what when one of my speeches, I talk about in Chinese, the word crisis consists of two characters. One means danger, the other one means opportunity. And while there's all kinds of horrible things happening in the world, there's also amazing opportunities if you look at them from the proper point of view. It reminds me of a story I used to share with my little ones about the king who had the childhood friend that had this ridiculous habit. No matter what the situation, whether it was positive or negative, he always said the same thing: this
Mhm.
is good. Well, the king was out hunting with his friend one day. His friend was always in charge of loading the king's rifle. Well, something went horribly wrong this day. As the king fired his rifle, it blew off his right thumb, to which his friend responded, this is good. The king was furious with his friend, so he put his friend in prison. Well, a year later, the king was out hunting in forbidden grounds when he was captured by a tribe of cannibals. And as the cannibals tied the king to a post, put logs at his feet to set him aflame to make their supper, one of the cannibals noticed that the king was missing his right thumb. Well, being a superstitious tribe, they never believed in eating anything that was not whole. So they released the king to his freedom, The king could not believe his good fortune. As he ran back to the palace, he remembered what his friend had said. So he rushed to the prison, released his friend, apologized profusely, told his friend the entire story, to which his friend responded, "This is good." The king couldn't believe his ears. He's like, "How could it be good? I just put you in prison for a year." His friend looked at him and said, "But if you hadn't have put me in prison, I would have been out hunting with you, and the cannibals would have eaten me." So everything in life is a point of view. So keep your eyes open,
Yeah.
folks. And as a thank you for having me today on your show, Michael, I wanted to give everybody a free guide. If you go to freestoryguide.com, again, freestoryguide.com, this is a blueprint that will help you map out your presentation, because I believe everybody is just one well-crafted story away from seven figures. You can get that at freestoryguide.com. And I just really want to thank you again, Michael, for having me today and enduring with my technical difficulties and all that. I
It's
appreciate you.
okay. Yeah, I appreciate you being here and like showing up on time and you're really sharing your story and what you had to give myself and the audience was is a treasure. So I definitely appreciate it and you're welcome back anytime. And for you wonderful listeners, if you want to catch the nuggets and get into the conversation and follow the communication with Dr. Danny Brassell, go to our Facebook community, The Thrive Well Journey, and connect with us. And as we always say, let's make thriving our new normal. Take care.